Hi, welcome to Story Time with Dave Booker. I appreciate you being here. Hope you're ready for another chapter in SOLEMAN, the man at the top. So today we're doing a new chapter. SOLEMAN's feeling better now, so he's back on back on track. Let's get started with our next chapter. A new beginning. The warden looked at John's file. He nodded, pursed his cheeks, and occasionally looked up at him with a penetrating stare. Well, John, it seems you are getting out early. I hope you now realize that good behavior does have benefits. That works on the outside as well as in here. John stood before him. He was wearing a new suit that had been given to him by the penitentiary. The threadbare clothes he'd worn 7 months ago were gone. His few personal effects were handed back, wallet with $56, a pocket watch, and a pocket knife. He had done his time and was about to be released. The warden stood next. Oh, Lord. Hold on. The warden stood and extended his hand. Best of luck to you, and I sincerely hope I never see you within these walls again. He grinned as he shook John's hand. The guard escorted him to the door, handed over $150 in traveling money and a train ticket home. The doors closed heavily behind him. He stood a moment, basking in the warmth of freedom, despite the cold rain that was beginning to flood the sidewalk. Looking back at the prison he'd left, he vowed never to return. The train station was a 45-minute walk, or he could take a taxi for $20. He walked. On the train home, he contemplated on what awaited him at the end of the trip. Soon after John had gone to prison, his father's bakery had burnt down, and his father perished in the fire. So what remained? A home he'd left with no regrets and the memory of a father who had been angry that he didn't have a son to pass the business on to. John had worked at the bakery for only a short while, but considered it a waste of time and effort. He could make 10 times what he earned working there out on the streets, doing a quick holdup or two, or robbing even a single home. That was what caused his father to kick him out. Go ahead, ruin your life. Don't make me a part of it. Get out. And if I ever see your face again, I'll bash it in with a rolling pin. He could even hear it in his father's gruff German accent. Well, the old man was gone, and he could return home, free of his father's constant complaints and insults. He exited the train and walked into the darkened platform. Thumbing several rides, he was eventually driven near to his home and walked the final half mile. His old home was now dark and vacant of life. The door was locked. He had no key. Fortunately, it wasn't really a problem for a man of his expertise. He pulled out a card, slid between the crack by the handle, and opened it. He'd often warned his father to change the lock, but his old man was stubborn as they came. He flipped the switch. No power. He'd have to call utilities to turn everything back on. Fortunately, he found a couple of candles on the table and lit them. Wandered around, reacquainting himself. In the master bedroom, he saw an envelope on the dresser, probably an old bill. A closer examination discovered it was addressed to himself. Going downstairs, he placed the candle on the side table and sat comfortably to read the final message from his father. As he opened it, he sighed deeply. I know what's inside. Why bother reading it? Another vitriolic, abusive letter stating all my failures as a son and heir. Assuming the worst, he still opened it and was surprised by the warmth of the opening sentence. My dear son, if you are reading this, then I have died. And if I am dead, I promise you that it was not accidentally or from infirmity. Rest assured, I was murdered by my enemies, of which I am proud to say I had many. An enemy means you have power and authority they envy. You only knew me as a simple baker with a small shop. That was not the business I wanted you to inherit. The baker was my front, was a good one too. My real work was not a career affected by the forces of the law, or even by yourself, who lived with me until you so abruptly departed. Though I berate you and belittle you, it was with a purpose. Ours is a dangerous trade, and one must be hardened to sustain the blows that follow. Now that I am gone, I once more offer you the opportunity to follow in my footsteps. Go into my closet and push on the wall on the right-hand side. What you find is now yours. In my desk is a listing of my crew. There are only 3 of them, and I'm in hopes that they have not suffered the same fate as I. They'll be obedient to you since you are my son. Oh, I'm not about to have you start with the meager travel money they gave you from the penitentiary. The satchel in that closet compartment contains 100,000. Should be enough to allow you to begin in decent style. Purchase yourself a modest business so that the money you earn can be washed through it. Good luck, and I hope you rise to great heights. It was unsigned, but then no signature was needed. Going to the closet, he worked on various methods until he found the hidden compartment. The satchel was a wonderful sight for a man with limited means. He stuffed a few big bills into his wallet and secured the rest. On the shelves were a variety of implements, the like of which you'd never seen. There was a thin rolling pin that separated, revealing a thin but strong blade attached to the handle. There were a variety of gun-shaped pieces with boxes of capsules. Well, you'd have to figure out some secluded area to test them out and see what they contained. There were small pie tins that were stronger than he'd ever seen, yet light and seemed aerodynamic. Now, there are other items that were all connected in one way or another with his father's trade. He discovered their uses as well. There would be time. Now he was hungry and tired. His father's closet was full of excellent suits. Tried one on, and it fit as though made for him. He regretted that his old shoes were not suitable for the suit, but he'd acquire better footwear later. He went downtown to the first really good restaurant he could find, dined elegantly, and came home to sleep. Tomorrow would begin his new life. He was roused early by a knock at the door. A policeman was standing there with a box. "Mr. Baker?" John felt a moment of disquiet, but composed himself to be pleasant. "Yes, what can I do for you, officer?" The officer held out the box. "Sir, this is all that remains from your father and his bakery." John lifted the lid to see a pair of empty boots. Though clean and still amazingly shiny, they smelt of the fire and as if they had been worn in the rain then left on to dry. In short, they smelt horrible. "How did my father die?" "Well, can't say for sure, sir. Looked as though he had been overcome from the smoke and dropped so sudden he must have died almost instantly. These are under the table. I can only suppose that would account for them not getting burned up." The officer passed the box over, raised his cap, and departed. John sat the boots on the table and stared at them. The light from the candle grew in intensity, making the boots appear to glow. They seemed to pulse with radiant energy. The pulsing was hypnotizing. He reached out and slowly put the boots on. They glowed brighter and adjusted it for a perfect fit. John was suddenly filled with criminal knowledge that spanned centuries. He gained skills that had been accumulated over many lifetimes. He was now a criminal deluxe, as his father had been, but his father had been one of many. He would rise above the others and become the only boss. Time was right for a new wave of crime and revenge. John took his father's advice and purchased a small bakery on the best side of town. Large enough that any profits would seem reasonable, but small enough he could run it with minimum staff. He decided to specialize in bread and rolls and tarts. He hired a couple of bakers to operate the place, so he was free to find his father's cohorts. In his office, he called the numbers from a slip of paper he found in the desk at home. The first voice was gruff and barely communicative. "What?" No other greeting was offered. "This is John Baker. I was instructed to contact you and find out if you wanted to get back in the bakery business." "Where?" 1245 Lavash Lane. "Right. phone hung up as if the man was in a hurry to get there. He called the second number and waited as the phone rang continually for 5 minutes. When it finally was answered, it was immediately hung up with no word spoken. Shrugging, he tried the third number. This time it was answered on the third ring. Hello, who's calling? The voice was rich and melodious and vibrant. He grinned as he introduced himself. My name is John Baker. Does that name mean anything to you? There was a slight pause. Where? He again gave his address. I'll be right there. The voice had sounded almost eager, at least he hoped so. Counted on the two voices, one gruff, so probably a big muscular bruiser. The other voice was so soft and warm that it brought goosebumps to his arms. In the background, he heard the bakers beginning to operate the bakery. The sound of dough being slapped, punched, and folded, mixed with the rhythmic beat of dough in the mixers, made for interesting background noise. He watched his bakers making smooth, pure tallow for the pastries, cutting dough and folding it into the pans or rolling it into long baguettes. The back door opened and a short, broad-shouldered man walked in. Dressed in a sweater and black pants and chewing on a toothpick, he looked like a movie version of a thug. A voice from the front caught his attention. It was the same mellifluous voice he had heard before. He dashed to the front. Facing the window was a slender frame dressed in black. The long red gold hair simmered under the overhead light. John felt his heart beat faster. Hello, can I help you? When they turned around, the goatee and mustache made the blood drain from John's face. Are you all right? The man asked, concerned at the sudden change. I'm fine. What can I do for you? The man looked at the empty display. I was wondering if you were open. It's going to be nice to be able to get fresh bread now. John smiled. Well, we just began. We'll have some up by tomorrow morning. The man left and John walked ejectedly to the rear. The back door opened and a sturdily built, attractive woman walked in. She also had red gold hair that curled and waved down her back. The voice was so similar to the man's, there was no wonder he had been deceived. She stood looking at John as if trying to decide if it would be worth staying. You must be Robert's son. I'm Cerisi Gouteau. The man who first walked in decided that he should introduce himself as well. I'm Pat, it's Siri. John took them into his office and asked them to sit. From a satchel, he pulled out a few items he had found in the closet. These were the items he didn't recognize, and he saw enlightenment. These were tools my father used. I was wondering if you could tell me what the pellets do. Pat reached out and took the 3 colored capsules. Pointed at each in turn. The big red one is a foaming dough that envelopes a person and then solidifies. Kind of like being in a bread cocoon. Never tasted it, but we found out you could eat your way out of it. This big white one is my favorite. It's a foam that forms a wall. Robert used to use it to block doors. It'd splat on the door, expand all over, and then nobody could get that door open. It was made from solidified fondant. And after a while, it went from rock hard to sticky like taffy. I tried some. It tasted pretty good. Cerisi rolled her eyes. This last is a gas pellet. We didn't use it much because it smells like rotten eggs. You got the idea when we left a load of eggs outside on a hot day. One broke when I was bringing them inside, and we had to spend a while bleaching the place. He chuckled at the memories. Cerisi looked disdainfully at Pat and pointed at the gadgets on display. Your father made these when he first began. Pat was one of the bakers, and I was a cashier. He saw something in us that made him choose us as his associates in his crimes. Later, he relied on our expertise rather than this paraphernalia, though Pat is fond of using the gadgets. Pat was the muscles, and I was the procurer. It may not look like it, but I can slip through almost any gate or opening with ease. I can contort and maneuver through almost any space. Your father was the brains, and I must admit he had excellent ones. Are you up to taking his place? Her words carried a challenge. He'd have to prove himself capable of leading this team. He told them to go home and return tomorrow, and he'd have their first job planned out. This test, not only of his own prowess, but that of his crew, consisted of stealing a museum piece called Excess. Under a glass case was $1 million in cash. The case was surrounded by a wire cage, and of course, there was a pressure alarm nearby. He looked at the pellets his father had created. Ingenious though they were, he was quickly coming to the realization that they couldn't be used, at least not in their present form. They screamed bakery, and that would be detrimental. The capsules could be emptied and filled with other things that would have appearance. He got out his old chemistry books and his chemistry set from when he was younger. For something that was supposed to be for children, it had a fair selection of volatile chemicals. He chose those which, when combined, would be able to eat through the chain link fencing. Not completely, but it would soften it enough that Pat should be able to wedge it open. Cerese could worm her way through, fire a bridge pellet, and then walk across. Then what? How could she extract the package from under the glass? He created a two-piece foaming shell that could form a bridge. He had to use one of his father's small foaming pellets that would suffice to make the center of the bridge. Then the bridge would expand and the bottom portion disintegrate, allowing the pressure pad to be bypassed. He went down to the basement where his father had a machine shop in miniature. Finding two extremely strong plates, he added a hole in the wide corkscrew. By adding a piece under the bottom plate, he hoped to lift the case and hold down the pressure plate under the money. He considered how to remove the package. It was bulky and unwieldy. The bills were in a plastic bag, so you need to be able to attach a handle that could hold up to 25 pounds. He looked around for an instant adhesive that he attached to a handle and put a nonstick cover over it. He placed everything into the satchel and set it beside the bed. In the morning, he dressed fastidiously. He wanted to look like the boss. Good grooming and careful dressing command respect. Plus, it might make him look better in Cerese's eyes. He was in his office early and sampling a few of the cinnamon rolls they had made. They were large and very good. Well, if he ever decided to give up crime, the place might just pay enough he could make a living off that. He shook his head. Nah, too boring. Cerese arrived first. He offered her something to eat, but was turned down. She looked him over in his new suit and polished boots, his hair carefully groomed. Well, he looked pretty darn good. Well, she must have thought so too, because he rated a slight smile from her. She also addressed to impress, and her perfume was chosen to elicit a favorable response. She knew from long experience that a woman who was even mildly attractive could have a great deal of influence on the average male. But over time, she expected to have a complete control over John. Pat arrived dressed in the same clothes as the day before. He took the offered refreshment and sat down to enjoy it and listen to his boss. That explained the job. We're going to start with a fairly easy one. The museum has an exhibit called Excess, containing $1 million in cash. Cerese raised an eyebrow incredulously. Thought you said an easy one. Don't fret it. I have plenty of tools that we can use to make it simple. She looked speculatively at him and thought, you might just be worth teaming up with yet. They went over the plan until the museum closed, and they were certain they were ready. The back door of the museum, John removed a thin wire from his bag, wedged it through the lock, and placed the two spools on either end. Swiftly, he cut through the bolts and opened the door slightly. The magnetic plate slid above the door, holding the alarm in place. He opened the door wide and ushered them in with a graceful gesture. They skirted the walls, keeping in the shadows. Arriving at the cage to tell their pride, John handed out their equipment. Pat was excited to use a pellet gun and aimed for an inconspicuous area to hit. The pellets splattered, the liquid spread, and while a little smoke escaped, nothing else. Pat looked at the gun in disappointment. Didn't work. John handed over some rubber gloves. It worked enough. Grab it from the center where you hid and pull. Pat pulled out a small section of the fencing and the way was open for Cerese. He handed her a pellet gun as well. She looked at it disdainfully. Toys and gadgets were not her line, but John insisted that she use it. Shrugging, she reached inside the hole and pulled the trigger aimed at the floor. The pellet burst and foam spread. First, she was unimpressed, but when the center disintegrated, she looked back and grinned. The hole was small, so she raised her arms and twisted them backwards so that her shoulders dislocated. Suddenly, she was a lot thinner and maneuvered through the narrow opening easily. A turn of her arms and her shoulders locked with an audible click. He had it through the wedge and the handle. While she was busy extracting the money, he went in search of the guards to bundle them out of the way. Returning quickly, he found Cerese had extricated the money and was hefting it dejectedly. It seemed lighter than she had expected. Pat had to hit the fence again with another pellet so that he could open it wider. She passed it through, but looked disgruntled. But the disgruntled look on her face said she wasn't happy. John took the bundle and understood. It was far too light. The team went back to the bakery to open the bundle. Sitting behind the desk with his two cohorts sitting opposite, he unwrapped the package. The top layer contained a complete set of wrapped notes worth 10,000 each. Beneath was a styrofoam block that had thin strands of wrapped paper that looked like the ends of the upper layer. The $1 million pile only had about 80,000. Distributing the good money between them, he apologized for the meager takings. Pat just shrugged, took his money, and looked at the styrofoam on the desk. Shrugging again, he pocketed his share and shook John's and Cerese's hand. Call me when the next job comes up. Cerese distributed her money about her person, breaking apart the stacks to maintain her normal appearance. Her voice was soft as she saw John's disappointment. You did well, John. The amount we took is immaterial. What matters is the skill you showed in planning and preparation. I look forward to our next mission. She shook his hand and swept out into the night. The next one is Crime and Revenge. So that's the next chapter that we will be doing on Tuesday. So I hope you'll be here for that. And let me see if I can get this thing to work. There we go. All right. So that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. I hope you are enjoying SOLEMAN. So that's it. Can't think of anything else I want to say. I've got the I've got the next book of SOLEMAN coming, so I'll have the new book to put out here when I'm doing that one. I'm working on Sheriff in a Small Town 5, and I'm about 10,000 words into that already. So expect to have another book to go on to as soon as we're done with this one. So I think I'm going to enjoy writing this again. It's fun to come up with something that I guarantee you're not going to be expecting. So if you guys can think of anything, guys and gals, anybody can think of anything that you'd like to hear me write, new ideas are always welcome. So that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday. Be good to yourself, and take care. Bye. Have a good one.